She was called the Pearl of Eridan. Estelle grew up in Verdun, amidst the finest silks, gilded arches, and majestic ceremonies. The daughter of King Antoine I, the Just, she felt the proud burden of the Delhi dynasty from childhood. She was only 12 when the envoys of Albion arrived to ask for her hand in marriage. A smile flickered across the courtiers' faces, but her father's eyes remained cold. This marriage was a matter not of the heart, but of the state. King Leopold II was 24 at the time. In the portraits sent from Stormbridge, he seemed noble and stately, tall, with soft features, reserved, and dignified. The princess girl, raised on tales of chivalry, envisioned a scene where the warrior king would bow his head before her, pledging loyalty and protection. "You will become the Queen of Albion," her father, King Antoine, once told her, leaning against the carved throne. "This is a union of crowns, my girl, and you must bear it with honor." "But what if he does not love me?" Estelle quietly asked. Her father chuckled, like a man for whom such questions were meaningless. "Love is for commoners. For you, authority and the crown will suffice." The sea was turbulent, roaring like a wild beast, when the ship from Eridan, laden with wedding gifts, docked at the shores of Albion in January of 1308. Estelle, the 12-year-old princess, daughter of the Eridanian king, stepped onto foreign soil. Her fair hair shone beneath her veil, her alabaster skin catching the reflection of the winter Stormbridge sun. Her eyes, large and clear as the morning sky, searched slowly for King Leopold II, her husband. Her heart, still childlike and naive, trembled with anticipation. "I will become queen," she whispered. Her voice shook like a harp string, but Albion, cold and gloomy, was already preparing a cage for her. The welcome in Stormbridge was lavish. The city streets were adorned with ribbons. The people shouted, "Long live the Queen!" Estelle walked over carpets of scarlet petals, feeling as though destiny favored her. But the first glance of Leopold, falling upon her, was cold. He smiled out of courtesy, but his eyes wandered elsewhere, and in that distraction, she sensed her presence meant little to him. Estelle, born in the year 1295 in Lyon, had grown up in the luxury of Verdun, where songs were sung about the glory of the Delhi dynasty, and servants bowed before her smile. The only surviving daughter of King Antoine, known as the Just, she was the Pearl of Eridan. She was raised as a future queen. Latin, poetry, embroidery, but her soul loved the glitter, the long silk gowns, the fur-lined surcoats, and the jeweled belts that sparkled at her waist. She covered her golden wheat-like hair with a translucent veil, and atop it, a golden circlet, the symbol of her greatness. "You are the pride of Eridan," Antoine would say. His voice was firm. The choice of a groom was taken with particular seriousness at court. The choice fell upon Leopold II, King of Albion. He was 12 years older than the bride. Rumors about Leopold were contradictory, but Antoine dreamt of giving his daughter a crown. The wedding in Normandy was sumptuous. Wine flowed like a river, lutes played, and Estelle, in a dress of scarlet silk, shone like a star. At the wedding feast, Estelle noticed that the groom constantly leaned toward one of his knights, Guillaume de Tréville. Their laughter, their glances, their light touches seemed too familiar. The young queen tried to disbelieve her eyes, repeating to herself, "He just trusts his friend. That is how it is at court." But her illusions were shattered when, a few days later, Leopold presented de Treville with a part of the very jewels that had been wedding gifts from her father. "But these are Eredin's gifts," she exclaimed, not concealing her offense. Leopold cast a quick, irritated glance at her and replied dryly, "Guillaume deserves more. He is my brother in arms." That was when Estelle first felt her ship of hopes and childish fantasies begin to sink into the icy water of harsh reality. Estelle's uncles, Count Arnaud and Viscount Gerard, who had attended the wedding celebration, conveyed the unhappy news to King Antoine. "It is an insult," Arnaud wrote, seething with indignation. It would be one thing if Leopold II had a mistress, but favorites. Life at the Albion court proved to be an ordeal for the young Estelle. She brought with her the sophisticated Eridanian fashions, long flowing gowns, belts studded with precious stones, and fur capes. Dozens of tailors and embroiderers surrounded her. Golden threads shimmered in their hands. But all this splendor seemed alien within the gloomy walls of Albion's castles, saturated with dampness and distrust. The court ladies watched her with secret envy, but the whispers behind her back were not about her beauty or her fashions. They whispered about the king's coldness, about his favorite, about how the young queen remained merely a shadow beside a husband estranged from her. Leopold spent his evenings with de Treville. Their laughter drifted from his chambers, while Estelle, sitting alone in hers, stared resignedly into the mirror. "Lord, grant me strength," she whispered. Her fingers touched her veil. "I must be queen, even if he does not see a wife in me." Albion in the 14th century was torn by war with the northern clans, where Lord Macdonald was crushing Leopold's troops. Barons, discontented with the king's weakness and de Treville's influence, plotted conspiracies. They saw him as a threat to the state. A low-born outsider controlled the king, like a puppeteer. In 1312, de Treville was captured and executed. His head rolled under the screams of the crowd. Leopold went mad with grief. He ignored Estelle, avoided her, wept in the presence of his confidants, and vowed revenge. "They took my friend from me," the king cried. His voice trembled with tears. The queen, left alone with her thoughts, felt a strange sense of relief for the first time. She thought, "Now he is free. Now, perhaps, he will see me." And her eyes shone with hope. She approached Leopold, and her hand touched his shoulder. "I am here, my king," she said. Her voice was soft as silk. But Leopold turned away. His gaze was empty. "You are not him," replied Leopold II. In that moment, Estelle's soul contracted, tasting the bitterness of disillusionment. Despite all the pain and humiliation, Estelle performed her duty as queen. In 1312, she bore a son, Theodore, the future king, and then 3 more children. But even this did not give the queen a chance to draw closer to her husband. No void opened in Leopold's heart for his wife. Her place was taken by a new favorite, Renard de Moray, even more greedy and cunning than the last. The barons whispered, Eredin raged, and Estelle, in her chambers, smiled while holding the small Theodore, the future king, in her arms, thinking, "If not I, then my son will change Albion's fate." Every day she learned patience and resilience. In the depths of her soul, a new Estelle was being born. Not a girl, not a betrayed bride, but a woman ready for battle. "I am the queen," she repeated to herself in the mirror, "and that means I must be stronger than my heart." Time passed, and Albion gasped for breath. The war with the northern clans had exhausted the treasury, and the great famine claimed thousands of lives. Rains drowned the harvest, and children died in the streets. The barons, dissatisfied with the weakness of Leopold II, prepared a new conspiracy. Estelle was no longer a girl with dreams of chivalric love. Standing before Albion and Eredin was a young woman who had learned to conceal her feelings behind a veil of dignity. But the firmer she became, the more unbearable was the proximity of the man her husband loved. Renard de Moray entered Leopold's life like a storm. Tall, lean, with sharp features and an inextinguishable glint in his eyes, he immediately won the king's trust. Unlike the gentle, almost romantic de Treville, Renard was calculating and avaricious. He was not interested in poetry or tournaments. He craved lands, titles, and power. Leopold listened to him as if charmed. The king's orders increasingly carried the tone of de Moray. The lands of the rebellious barons passed into his hands. The treasury was depleted, and the nobility's discontent grew. For Estelle, this became a new humiliation. She was not merely left unloved. Her dignity as queen was trampled upon. Renard allowed himself to treat her with contempt, neglecting her position. In the presence of others, he could interrupt her, and at times even permitted himself to make sarcastic jokes. "My lord," she dared to address her husband during a council once, "your favorite casts a shadow upon the crown. The people hate him, and thus they hate you." Leopold turned pale, and his eyes flashed with what Estelle knew too well, a blind devotion to the man she despised. "Be silent, Estelle," he hissed through clenched teeth. "You do not know what you speak of. Renard is my loyal friend." And then the queen understood that counting on her husband's mercy was futile. She remained a prisoner of the court. She was surrounded by the walls of Blackwater, filled with the whispers of courtiers. Women observed her searchingly. Men spoke of her beauty. But beneath it all, she was an outsider, the queen of Eredin and Albion, and yet an exile in her own home. In 1321, the patience of the Albion barons snapped. A rebellion against de Moray began. The conspirators demanded the favorite's expulsion, threatened arms, and prepared for battle. Estelle watched the events with hope. It seemed fate itself was about to free her from tyranny. Indeed, de Moray was exiled, but the joy was short-lived. Leopold, as if having lost his mind, gathered his forces, reclaimed power, and brought his favorite back. The retribution was cruel. The lands of the rebellious lords were ravaged, their families persecuted, and their heads fell on the scaffold. Estelle realized that the king and his favorite were inseparable. Any attempt to oppose them turned her into a hostage herself. In 1324, the blow came from Eredin. Her brother, King Louis, went to war with Albion. Estelle found herself in an impossible position, daughter of Eredin and wife of the Albion monarch. The Stormbridge court met her homeland with hatred, and the shadow of suspicion fell upon her. Renard de Moray insisted that the queen's property be confiscated. Her lands and income passed into his hands. Moreover, her confidants, the Eredanians, were banished, leaving Estelle almost without support. She, the daughter of the mighty Antoine the Just, suddenly found herself deprived of everything. The title remained, but power slipped away, like sand through her fingers. "Are you taking my property?" she coldly asked her husband once, when he, with downcast eyes, signed another decree. Leopold did not dare to meet her gaze. "It is necessary for the state," he mumbled. "No," she replied with an icy voice. "It is necessary for your Reynard." From that day on, she spoke to her husband only officially. There were no family words, or any signs of intimacy between them. But fate presented her with a chance. In 1325, Leopold sent her to Eredin to negotiate peace. For many, it looked like a diplomatic mission, but in truth, the queen gained what she had not known for many years. Freedom, Lyon in 1325, was not the same city Estelle remembered from her childhood. It was louder, richer, and stricter. The narrow streets swarmed with merchants. The air smelled of hot bread, wine, and torch tar. And in the heart of the city stood Verdun, the fortress palace of her brother, King Louis. Here, for the first time in years, Estelle felt not like a prisoner, but a free woman. She no longer belonged to the whims of her husband and his favorite. No one dared to order her to be silent. In Lyon, she was greeted as the daughter of Eredin, as an envoy of the crown. She stood in Verdun on the very spot where she had once dreamt of great love as a child, and whispered to herself, "I will not return to Albion as the person I was. I will find a way to break him and reclaim my power." There, at court, she met Baron Richard de Clermont, whose name in Albion had recently been spoken with hatred and fear. He was a baron, one of those who had raised the rebellion against Leopold and de Moray. After the defeat, he was imprisoned in Stormbridge Castle, but managed to escape. He deceived the guard, descended by rope, crossed the river, and vanished. When Estelle saw him in Eredin, he was already a legend, a rebel who had outwitted the king. De Clermont was older than her. A stern strength radiated from his appearance, a strength Estelle lacked next to her husband. His dark eyes looked directly, without fear, and in that direct gaze, she first felt respect for herself as a woman. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing before her, "you are not alone. We share common enemies." And these words proved stronger for her than any declaration of love. "You are a queen who deserves to be served," he said. His voice was low and captivating. "Allow me to be your shield." For the first time in years, Estelle felt warmth. Their connection, which began in 1325, was like a spark in the grass. De Clermont, an experienced warrior and exile, became her support. In Lyon, far from the shadows of Albion, Estelle flourished. At first, their meetings were discreet. Conversations in the gardens of Verdun, brief glances during councils, intercepted letters. But gradually, something that could no longer be hidden flared up between them. For Estelle, de Clermont became not only an ally, but a bedrock. For the first time in her life, she felt that she was next to a man who was ready to fight for her, not to use her. They planned together. The Albion crown was weakened. The treasury was empty. The barons enraged. The people hated de Moray. All that remained was to find the strength for the strike. In Lyon, Estelle acted not as a humiliated wife, but as a stateswoman. She managed to arrange a temporary truce with her brother and used that time to gather supporters. Albion exiles, dissatisfied with Leopold's rule, flocked to her at the Eredanian court. She played the role of the queen mother, taking her eldest son, young Theodore, the heir apparent, with her. His presence became a weapon. Now she could speak on behalf of the future king. "I am not warring with Albion," she told the barons. "I am warring with the tyranny that is destroying it. My son is the rightful heir, and I am obliged to protect his right." With these words, she transformed a personal grievance into a sacred mission. In the spring of 1326, Estelle secured an audience with King Louis. "Give me an army," she said. There was a firm resolve in her voice. "I will save Albion for my son." Louis, whose love for his sister wrestled with politics, refused. "This is war, Estelle," he replied. His eyes were sad, but she did not give up. In the county of Northampton, the domain of Earl Frederick, she found an ally. His daughter, Lady Amelia, became the fiancée of young Theodore, and as a dowry, Estelle received a small army. Pope Julius III, despite the kinship between the bride and groom, gave permission for the marriage. "You are a genius," de Clermont said, his hand gripping Estelle's. "You outplayed them all." Estelle smiled. Her eyes shone. In September of 1326, her army landed in Melleray Bay. The barons of Albany, Richmond, and Brock defected to her side. Their banners flew. The people, exhausted by the great famine and the king's weakness, greeted her as a liberator. Barons one after another joined her side. Simple folk brought bread and wine to her army. Estelle, in silver armor that shone like the moon, rode at the head of the army, with her son, the 13-year-old Theodore, beside her. "You shall be king," she said. Her voice was firm. Leopold II and de Moray fled to the western lands, like cornered deer. Their power crumbled faster than they could realize. In Stormbridge, where Blackwater Castle loomed gloomily over the river, Estelle entered the throne room. Her scarlet silk dress shone like fire. "I am your queen," she announced, and the barons knelt. Renard de Moray was captured in Dorchester Fortress. His execution in November of 1326 was brutal. His lifeless body was subjected to abuse, first castrated, and then beheaded. Estelle watched everything, standing aside, her heart exulting. For the people, it was the end of a tyrant. For Estelle, the end of her humiliation. "This is not revenge," she thought. "This is justice." But her soul, like a mirror, reflected pain, years of humiliation, her husband's betrayal, and loneliness. De Clermont, standing beside her, touched her shoulder. "You have won," he whispered. His eyes glowed. She smiled. Leopold II was captured in November of 1326 near Whitehall. He was imprisoned in Greenwood Castle, where the cold walls held the echo of his despair. Estelle, arriving at the castle, met him in the shadowy hall. "You betrayed me," she said coldly. Leopold, haggard with extinguished eyes, looked at her. "I loved Estelle," he replied. His voice trembled. "But not you." She turned away. Her fingers clenched her veil. "You could have been a king," she whispered, "but you chose weakness." Leopold II became a prisoner. He was stripped of his authority, forced to renounce the throne in favor of his son. Everything unfolded as Estelle had dreamt. In January of 1327, her son, the 15-year-old Theodore III, was proclaimed King of Albion. But the true power belonged to his mother and her ally, Baron Richard de Clermont. Now, Estelle was called the Wolf of Eredin. In her eyes, this nickname was not an insult, but an acknowledgement. She had broken free from the role of victim and become the hunter. In her hands lay what she had sought all her life: power, respect, freedom. In the first years of the Regency, Albion seemed to take a breath. The people celebrated the fall of de Moray. The barons were grateful for deliverance from tyranny. Estelle governed with firmness and caution. She knew how to smile when necessary and speak coldly when circumstances demanded it. But next to her, de Clermont grew ever more prominent. His influence increased with every month. He acquired lands, titles, and wealth. People saw that he managed state affairs as if he himself were king. The barons began to whisper, "We overthrew one favorite only to raise another." For Estelle, he was more than an ally. She could not renounce him, for he had become her strength in the most difficult hour. Yet, she understood that de Clermont was too greedy for power, too rash in his ambitions. He behaved like the master of the kingdom, and increasingly spoke to her, even in a commanding tone. "We must keep the boy in hand," he said of Theodore III. "He is still easy to guide." Estelle listened and nodded, but something deep inside her turned cold. The former King Leopold II remained in captivity. First, he was held at Riverhall Castle, then moved to Greystone. No one doubted that he was dangerous as long as he lived. His name could become a banner for rebels. And then, on the 21st of September, 1327, the news swept across Albion. Leopold II was dead. The official story was that he died of illness, but rumors multiplied. The crowd whispered that he had been murdered on the orders of de Clermont and Estelle. Horrific tales circulated about tortures with red-hot irons to a shameful place, and screams in the castle tower. Estelle, learning of his death, locked herself in her chambers. "I did not want this," she whispered, and her tears fell onto a letter where de Clermont wrote about the victory. She had not given the order, but her silence had been the sentence. Albion, rejoicing for the young king, did not rise against her, but the shadow of guilt fell upon her soul. After the death of Leopold II, Estelle's position became precarious. People respected her as the king's mother, but condemned her as a woman who had too openly succumbed to passion. De Clermont granted himself more and more lands, behaved brazenly at court, and even signed documents with the royal seal without the young Theodore's knowledge. In 1330, the 17-year-old Theodore III rebelled against his mother. He hated de Clermont, whose shadow reminded him of his father. Supporters of the young king secretly entered Greenwood Castle, where Estelle and de Clermont were staying, using a hidden underground passage. In the darkness of the torches, they seized de Clermont right in the queen's chambers. Estelle screamed, pleading with her son, "Spare him. He is your friend. He is my ally. He saved us both." But Theodore looked at her not as a child, but as a sovereign. "Mother," he declared, "the kingdom cannot belong to two. It belongs to me." De Clermont was taken away, and a few weeks later, hanged as a traitor. His body was quartered and displayed in various cities, so that all might know the end of a usurper. Estelle was not executed. Her fate was milder. Her son still loved her as a mother, though he could not forgive her. She was stripped of her power, lands, and wealth, and sent into seclusion at Rosewood Castle. There she lived for almost 30 years, far from court, far from politics. She wore widow's weeds, prayed often, grew herbs in the garden, and wrote letters to her son that rarely reached him. Only occasionally was she brought to court celebrations, but no longer as queen, but as an old woman whose glory had long since faded. Estelle died in August of 1358, at the age of approximately 63. Thus ended the life of the woman who was called the Wolf of Eredin. She walked the path from a humiliated wife to the ruler of Albion, from a national heroine to a prisoner of her own ambitions. But her memory lived longer than she did. For some, she remained a symbol of feminine strength. For others, the embodiment of betrayal and cruelty.